Welcome, everyone. This is the Finance Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, February 11th, 2025. It is 6:32. I'd like to call this meeting to order with a Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20F, this meeting is being recorded. This meeting is being held in a hybrid meeting in accordance with the Governor of Massachusetts, March 12, 2020, order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, GLC 30A, Section 20. And on March 29, 2023, Governor Healy signed a supplemental 2023 budget bill allowing for remote and hybrid meetings in public spaces through March 31st, 2025. I'll introduce the Finance Committee members that are here tonight. So we have Duncan Law, Al Lees, Cindy Brown, myself, Karen Rouse, Christopher Thrasher, and remotely we have Hugh Morton. I'd like to let the school committee open up their meeting tonight as well. So Evan Genro is here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm calling this meeting of the Westport School Committee to order Tuesday, February 11th, 2025 at 6:33 p.m. We do not yet have a quorum, but we are opening it in the event that we do. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome. We're continuing with our department budget meetings, and tonight we have the school department here to present the meeting. And so we have Mr. Genro here. We have Mr. Auburn is remote, so hello, Tom. Nice to see you.
Hello, Tom.
Hi, Tom.
And Christopher Thrasher, also from the school committee.
Indeed. And Madam Chair, just to clarify, because the voters of Westport didn't vote me as a school committee member for this particular meeting, I am going to be acting exclusively as a school committee member, and we'll shall we say, join in after this presentation is done.
Okay.
Just to be clear.
All right. Well, thank you. So I'd like to open the meeting to Evan. So Evan, you can introduce everyone who else is here, and then you can start your presentation for us.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the members of the Finance Committee. We have joining us as well Melissa Souza from the Business Department at Westport Community Schools, and also Michelle Raposa, our business manager, who's also controlling the presentation today. I just want to first thank them for their efforts in both putting this together and for compiling this presentation. I think there's a lot of great information in there, and I know that the Finance Committee had received an advanced copy of it, and I know that following this, we're certainly open to questions and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, so just starting off with the presentation here, this is our fiscal year 2026 proposed budget that the school committee approved in January. We had started this process earlier in the fall and met with the leaders of different departments in the school district, met with building leaders or building principals to identify what needs that they had, and they presented those to us, and the committee met over the last few months and went through those and decided which were, they were all important needs, of course, as we all know, but we had to, knowing the situation that the town's in with our budget and continues to be in, we had to prioritize those and present a budget that we feel reflects the highest priority needs of the district. So that's what this committee voted on in January. But just wanted to give background on the process and how we got there. So, and I know that Melissa and Michelle worked very hard on their end as well on that. So.
Yes.
So this first slide in the presentation here, it's a Globe article, but just sort of underscores the issue that not only schools but also municipal services in general are facing as a result of the costs passed on from inflation and I guess macroeconomic factors that are certainly, I think, amplified for entities like a school district that take in so many different types of materials. Like we have food costs that we absorb the increase of. There's transportation expenses that are passed on to us. So a lot of those are reflected in our budget line items.
As well as the high sped costs as well, tuition and transportation that go along with those of mandated legal requirements that we must provide.
So going to our next slide here, this just gives an overview of where we'll go. We have a message from superintendent here. Financial overview, we'll go through our enrollment, unfunded and anticipated needs that the district has. We'll look at our revolving accounts and also special education. I know this was a topic last year. The district had $750,000 of unanticipated expenses in the last fiscal year. And I know that was a topic of discussion, so we'll outline that again for this fiscal year and what that looks like going into FY26.
Pardon me,
Yes.
Chair Gendro, I just wanted to let you know Dr. Pacheco has joined the meeting, so the school
Thank you.
committee does now.
So you do have a quorum.
Thank you. Welcome, Melissa. Okay. All right. So moving to our blueprint for continuous student improvement. Tom, do you want to take this and the message from the superintendent, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I can make this very quick, thank you. One of the things that has become abundantly clear is that there is no one-size-fits-all in terms of educating our kids. And this has become brutally apparent. And so what we're trying to do in an effort to maximize the quality of the education at Westport is to really personalize the education for our kids, whether they want to go and, hopefully apply and get accepted to an Ivy League school, or whether they want to go directly into the workforce. We need to provide those accommodations because unfortunately, by 2030, it's approximated that 50% of the jobs that currently exist will not be around. So we have to take this into consideration when we're educating our kids, and it requires us to be both nimble and be able to move in a moment's notice. So I think we're doing an excellent job. It's a credit to our incredible staff, and it's an honor to be called superintendent of this great district.
Thank you, Tom. And just to note, I mean, the administration has met and continuously meets to go over ways to improve. The school committee just met with our building leaders to discuss improvement plans for our schools as well. And, in addition to that, we have a lot of great things happening at Westport schools. We have increased enrollment. We have a lot of great acceptances to different universities. Tom, I don't know if you wanted to mention a couple of those, just to highlight.
Yeah, I absolutely will. We just had a senior that has received a full ride to Boston University. We have another student that got accepted into New York University, which has an acceptance rate of somewhere just above 5%. So, when you take those two students, and we have many more, I don't want to go through like every one of them, obviously, but if kids are getting into BU for a free ride in, the University of New York, or New York University, it's just that we're doing a bang-up job considering the situation we have. That first page that Chair Gendro mentioned clearly indicates that the School Opportunity Act, which was passed in place of the original funding mechanism that passed in 1993, may have helped gateway communities, but it has not done anything for communities like Westport, and we're seeing the damages and still managing to move forward regardless. That's a credit to everyone that's involved in the schools and our community as well.
Thank you, Tom. So going to slide 10 here with the budget focus areas. So our FY26 increase is just over 6% from FY25 in our proposed budget. About half of this is our contractual, so that's made up of both of our bargaining units increases along with our other administrative staff's increases, and we also are looking at about $100,000 of contractual increase for transportation expenses for this fiscal year.
Right, so if we take that into account as well, that really brings us like 4% of the 6% increase is really contractual. We take a look at the other 2% are additional, which we consider level service, but additional increases.
Right. And just to highlight some areas here, educator support, facilities, and safety. So there are constant changes, especially with professional development. We like to provide opportunities to administrative staff to better serve our students. Community engagement. Technology is an important piece. A lot of districts are struggling with keeping up with their cyber needs. Cybersecurity is continuously identified as an area for improvement, not only for Westport, but for a lot of school districts. So trying to make sure that we invest in infrastructure and also that our students are able to have access to devices that are keeping up with the needs of the workforce and that they're prepared for that. So that's all important. We've received earmarks in the past for technology investments through Senator Roderick's office. I know that our Z-Space has done very well in terms of providing students opportunities outside of just the core academic fields and allowed them to look into fields like engineering or the medical industry. So that has really done well for our students. And we're looking to sustain that going forward is our hope. So looking at our, if you go to page 12, our recommended budget, so the final fiscal 25 budget was $22,651,207. Proposed FY26 is $24,040,788, which is about a $1.4 million increase over FY25. So that what that's comprised of, if you go to the next page, it lists all of those, the increases that from the FY25 to FY26 recommended budget. So the largest piece is the contractual obligations with our teachers union. So we approved a new 3-year contract earlier this year, in 2024. So this is reflective of that change. Our other bargaining unit, AFSCME, their increases are in there as well. Non-union obligations of about $82,000. The transportation expenses I noted, about $100,000. Utilities, including electric increases, about $65,000 and $25,000 for custodian and electric increases. SRO training, $1,500. Business technology teacher, so this was a position that had shifted over from the town was covering. That was this position was also half school teacher, so was teaching courses in the district, and that was the town had decided to shift that solely to the town responsibility, so that person was no longer teaching courses. So this budget figure reflects keeping that course there. Maintenance and custodial of $37,000 and $7,900. These are increases for those expenses, including boiler cleaning, the generator costs, Z-Energy, and fire alarms. District-wide laptops, 4-year replacement, so of $153,000. So I think what the intention here of the committee was instead of looking every 4 or 5 years to front load $500,000 of technology costs to replace student and staff devices, this would put it on sort of a set schedule so we can cycle devices, and so we would have a certain portion of student devices that are phased out every 4 years or so. Staff devices can last a little longer just because some of them are desktops, they may be different. So we asked our technology department to look into essentially the useful life of those devices and put that into a cycle. And this was the number that was arrived at. So we thought it was a way to put this in the operating budget that wouldn't impact, be a larger hit, say in 4 or 5 years' time at a single, in a single fiscal year. So that was the intention here. District-wide software, Lightspeed, $57,000. This is for the student devices. This is to maintain compliance, I believe, with, Melissa, can you provide some more on that?
Yes, that's Lightspeed. That was the cyber, making sure
Yep.
that the kids were protected and going into different websites and so forth, as well as phone maintenance, and also digitalizing our HR and mandated training that we have to do every year for new staff. So this was the different softwares to make that happen.
Mr. Robin?
Yes, I just want to mention that the Lightspeed piece, part of that was making sure that we were in compliance with laws that involve, internet and computer usage by our students when they take their devices home. So it's, this was not something we just wanted to add. We wanted to make sure we were in legal compliance. Thank you.
The next piece, teaching assistants that were new in fiscal 25. So those were funded in this fiscal year by rural aid.
Correct.
We're unsure of
correct.
what that looks like for
Yeah,
next
with
fiscal year.
the cuts that we could be facing, so we're trying to plan for that this year. Thank goodness that we did receive the rural aid to be able to, because there were 3 new teaching assistants that are mandatory based on the students' needs. So because of that relief funding, that grant funding allow us to at least stay within the budget for this year but not sure what we're facing next year in cuts, grants.
Thank you. And the other item on this list is a new therapeutic class. So the net cost here is $111,000, but this cost is, the total cost is higher than that. This is the net cost after considering age outs from our special education. So this was out-of-district placements that have aged out. So the savings in the fiscal year would cover a portion of this. And the intention here of including this is that not only would we be able to keep a couple of students in district, but we could also, our special education directors believe that we could also potentially bring some students back in district, which would be a cost savings as well, on the out-of-district line at least.
Right, because we know just district placement between tuition and transportation, you're talking anywhere 140,000. So with one student, being able to bring that into accommodate for other students is definitely a savings that we would have to be, be paying out.
Right. So that is our list, and that arrives at the $24,040,788. Going to the next slide, these break down the contractual obligations a bit more, especially on the transportation. Below the total contractual staff is $700,000. That's $530 of that is from our teachers union. The other 87 is from our other bargaining unit, AFSCME, and non-union, 82,000. The others, the next two pages break those other items down that we had just discussed. I don't think there was any more information on those.
No, it's just breaking it down by categories or departments for you, everything that was on that previous page.
Right. And again, this next slide just shows the total increase from FY25, and again, that's the 6.1%.
I think that was something, Karen, that you would like to see into those categories. So it was just another way of just breaking it down to each building and maintenance, support services, instructional, and administrative costs. So just the percentages compared.
Appreciate that, thank you.
The next slide is a comparison FY25 to FY26, but again by category. So this breaks down our special education salaries, special education expenses, transportation expenses. Those total about $2.1 million. Regular education about just over $16 million. So that's just a comparison through each category. So you can see that by fiscal year. And so slide 18 touches on the unfunded requests. So these are items that were included from our department heads and identified by building leaders as needs, and ones that the school committee, after going through them, did not include in the proposed budget, but we wanted to note here just as items for needs going forward. Curriculum department, we've seen some real, I think, improvements in curriculum in general, especially with literacy. Our curriculum director, Lisa Kaminsky, has done a great job, especially at the Macomber and the elementary school, with moving the needle on assessments for reading and getting students up to grade level. So, and I credit her with implementing programs that have really worked there. And
I do have to credit her too. She's been fantastic about writing different grants, which also gives us that extra funding to be able to do a lot of these the different helping in the reading, as you said, and math at different levels.
Just so I understand the tense, this says unfunded requests for FY25. Should that be 26? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So just so I understand that it's not the current year budget.
You deserve
that
the
was
prize for that. We didn't know how many times we looked through this.
Okay.
And we didn't notice that.
Good, all right. I just want to make sure I understood the tense.
It's always the stuff in the bold print.
Yeah, that's right.
And just on the literacy piece, actually, we have the commissioner, the DESE commissioner is visiting Westport this week, and one of the areas that he's interested in is the literacy programs that the district has implemented. So that's, I think, a real credit to the district that DESE has expressed interest in that. Mr. Robin?
Yeah, just for the aggrandizement of the group, the commissioner is coming down, exactly what Chair Gendro said. He's going to be taking time looking at a wildly successful literacy program that involved high dosage tutoring during the school year, which was paid for through state funding, which unfortunately was reduced, but due to our advocacy, they did manage to put some funding into it for this year, and they're looking at our neo-technical program, which I believe is going to be a model for the state, which will allow comprehensive schools like Westport to train their students in vocational education. As we know, many of our kids are not, due to the admissions rules or whatever, are not able to access the education that they very well need. So these are two very big, initiatives, and I think the commissioner's visit is a recognition of the great work they've done.
Thank you, Tom. So just going down this list, the total here is about just under 1.2 million of unfunded needs that have been identified by staff in the district that we have met about. And I know, one of these items, for example, is our summer school that we unfortunately cut in last year's budget and didn't make it in. So that's another item that I know the community has expressed interest in bringing back. So I'm hopeful in the future we can support that. Some of these other items include teaching assistants that I know would alleviate some of our staff. We know that, especially in our elementary school, we have some larger class sizes now that are creeping up towards the 30 number, which is difficult for, especially in younger grades, to manage that. And it's certainly helpful to have more staff there, so that's certainly a need. There are a number of, you'll see in the middle high school teachers as well that are there, including a guidance director that hasn't been something the district's had, and I think is a need given, again, growing enrollment. Right now the grades are sort of split between a couple of staff there, and it can be difficult to manage. Business teachers, media integrated arts teachers, math interventionists. So that's to address a need that we've identified in our math curriculum, that students might need some more support there, so that reflects that. And again, these items total just under 1.2 million. And going on to the next slide, this looks at our enrollment trends. So we continue to increase enrollment. And Tom, do you want to note the change, the 9 number? I know there was some nuance to that you had mentioned on how it's counted in younger grades.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I know that Michelle has worked very closely with Felicia Pacheco, because we were stunned that the increase was only 9 students. So if it's okay, through the chair, if Mrs. Raposa could actually elaborate a little bit more on that.
Can everybody hear me? I'm not sure how well. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yep.
So preschool state revised how they calculate preschool. They no longer will give us Chapter 70 money for paying preschool students. So we have about 67 preschool students, and we only now can get reimbursed through Chapter 70 for about like 18 students, because so many of them are full-paid.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yes.
I don't want you to, that's, thank you.
No, that felt
Thank
so
you.
painful, so thank you for trying.
So it has to do with the way that Chapter 70 is
Yeah.
calculated for our preschool students. But this number,
Otherwise,
yeah.
you would see a much larger increase. And again, this is not a one-off. Take a look at the data. This is an increase year after year, and it's important for me to say this, because in 2019, when we were talking about the budget situation that took place and why the schools were suffering financially, we were told by our legislative delegation that it was clearly an enrollment problem. We had lost 450 students over the last year, and now if you take a look at the trends moving forward, they've gone up and gone up significantly.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And I've noted this in the past, but this is it's a good problem to have. There are certainly programs, and it's a credit to the staff again on how our programs have been implemented in the district, and it's been attracting students and retaining students as well, which is very important. We used to see a drop-off as we get further into the middle school and the high school, and we're seeing that to a lesser extent now, which I think is because of the programs that have been implemented. And students really, a lot of this has been about personalizing education and making sure that we're tailoring it to the needs of our students and meeting their needs, and I think that, we've been able to do that to a large extent despite the resources that we have. So going ahead to our school lunch program, so our lunches, our meals are done through revolving accounts, and and students no longer pay for lunch. But this just shows the enrollment trend there. And again, I'll credit Michelle with this. Our lunch program has really received a lot of great attention over the last year. We've partnered with a lot of outside organizations on this, the Marion Institute being one of them, Farm to Table, to help bring local foods in the district, and also teach children about the way that works, which I think is
Sustainability,
really
and so
neat.
forth. Yeah, the different programs.
Yeah, that's great. The next slide looks at per pupil expenditures. So I know this can be a difficult metric to compare to when you get into per pupil, but Westport's sort of in the middle of the pack there, but below the state, middle of the pack with the list, but below the state average of $21,377. The next slide looks at free cash over the last few fiscal years since FY21 to FY25. Last year, as a result of the town meeting vote, that this was increased. So that was obviously the jump from FY24 to 25. And the next two go over the budget process and our timeline that we've had, starting with our July end of fiscal year meeting, and following through to when we began having budget sessions back in September to identify some of those needs that we talked about earlier. And federal and state grants on the next page. I know there's been discussion on these and what will happen, particularly with federal funding. So that's been a large uncertainty. Tom, I know you had been talking with other districts and what they were expecting in terms of reductions there. Can you elaborate on that? Mr. Robin?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. The Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents have told schools, based on what's going on, to possibly expect a 25% in the titles 1, 2, and 3, or something like that. For our purposes, and Michelle, you don't have to just shake yes or no. That would be somewhere around $133,000, $160,000 that we were looking at, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that is right, Tom. That is correct.
Okay, additionally, just across the wire today, the Trump administration has made significant cuts to the Department of Education. We are trying, and we're bracing for the possibility that this would include grants. So again, everything's up in the air right now as far as federal funding, and it really is concerning because we are a district that always is on the margins. So to lose that type of funding would be devastating. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And just to highlight, I mean, that's a considerable uncertainty going into the next fiscal year. A hit of $130,000 for a district of this size is pretty significant. I know you all understand, but that's, I know it was on the minds of Michelle and Melissa.
Yes.
Looking at the budget, so.
Especially that, they offset the budget over $207,000 with teaching salaries for both the West and the middle high schools. So that would be that much more funds that we're needing to find in the operating.
Right. And these are all laid out on the following page, slide 27 as well. The state and federal grants that have been received since FY21 are all laid out there. So in FY25, these total just under $1 million. So we have a significant reliance on grant funding.
Yes. And the decrease, a lot of it too, is to do with the ESSER funds being no longer being available. But I think we did a great job in making sure that we didn't structurally, deficit in our positions that were funded by ESSER.
So I have a question. There's no question that the grants and, federal funding, state funding, whatever, is going to change. I mean, my question, though, is that since 2019, 2020, how much of a buildup has the town had in programs, personnel, whatever it might be, that were a direct result of the grants? And was there a sunset on these, or are we expecting the town to pay for something that was initiated by a grant? Now the grants are going, but the department, the personnel, whatever it might be, is not going.
Right.
And I don't know I'm asking the question. I don't know the answer. I'm not making a value judgment.
Yeah, I can tell, ESSER was not used for
Right.
those expenses, recurring salary expenses. So when that sunsetted, we weren't as concerned with that because we hadn't baked that into our budget.
Okay.
No, I know
Some
that.
of the- do you want to
yeah.
touch on some of the
Well,
other
I know that the
grants?
Title, the ESSA, which are the Title I, Title II, and Title IV, a lot of those are entitlement. So we have been fortunate to be getting those. They're not competitive. So basically, what we relied on those for salaries have been consistent over the years
Okay.
in helping funding, as well as the SPED entitlement and early childhood SPED entitlement. As we said, that's one of the offsets of the budget. We rely on that over $300,000 to offset our tuition costs. So those, we've been fortunate being entitlement grants that we've been able to carry those over the past few years.
Okay.
They've only been
Yeah.
formula grants that were ones that were not competitive, so we're not unsure fiscal year to fiscal year
Year on
which
those.
ones are
Yep, okay.
being included.
This is probably what we're facing possibly for next year in cuts, 25%. And my years that I've been here is the highest that, on those entitlement grants that we've been
Right.
having to face, so.
Okay. And what percentage, I'm sorry, Karen, please.
I think, and just to answer, I think in one of your previous slides, there was a $90,000 rural grant. That's, I think, potentially.
That's
Right.
Right,
potential,
that's
yes.
potentially,
Yes.
that was funded by a grant that would then come
Would
into
then
the operating.
roll off
That-
or whatever.
And that was because that was a need within the fiscal year.
Yeah.
So normally that wouldn't be the case, but that was one that was, those were needs within the,
Right.
that we hadn't planned for in
And
the
I
last
think-
cycle.
I think 2 years ago, there were positions that were funded by ESSER funds that then did come into the operating budget. So I think that was 2 years
don't-
ago.
There may have been
Custodian.
one, but it was only temporary, I believe.
Yeah, there were a few.
I don't think it was a
positions, I think.
permanent one.
I think it was.
Was it Mr. Aubin?
Yes.
That might have been a
I believe
science
of
one.
them
It might have been-
Might have been a science, you're correct, there might have been a science position.
I believe that one of them was a response to the mental health issues that was caused by the COVID situation. And I believe it was a SAC that we actually, was it? I just want to make sure, Melissa?
There was a SAC as well, yes.
Right.
I apologize if I misspoke there.
That's
but that
okay.
was-
No, that's
yeah.
okay.
If I could continue.
But in other words, but I want to note that there were some districts that were relying
Right.
significantly on ESSER funds.
Right.
I mean, I believe Brockton may have been one of them. There were other
Right.
districts
Right.
that were relying, in the millions of dollars on, funding their full-time teaching
Right.
positions through these ESSER funds, which was known that they had
Right.
an end date.
If I could follow up with Mr. Lee's question regarding the Title I, Title II, and Title IV, if funding for those programs were cut significantly, what would be the impact? Would you decrease that program or look to the town to absorb the program? I think, is that kind of what you were?
That's an incredibly complex question. So I can tell you certainly that, there are mandated, through special education, we would have no alternative to hire whomever it was decided was needed, based on team meetings that take place that drive the determination of staffing. So that is one that we really have no jurisdiction over relative to, just being able to cut. We can't do that. So what we would have to do is we would have to make up those cuts somewhere else.
Okay.
So it would be pretty profound.
Okay.
Just to your point, I think the town as a whole, including the school, have really done a terrific job using ESSER funds and ARPA funds to really try to look at and using them for one-time funds and not baking them in, because it's just like using free cash, where then once those funds go away, you keep funding it. So, It was just a comment.
No.
It was, I think everyone's done a terrific job, and we've been conscious of watching that too, so.
Right.
And what's unique about, just to get back to the federal funding is, those were, again, formula-based.
Right.
So we had a somewhat good idea of what that would look like coming in year to year. And it wasn't a, significant question on, it's not the same as applying for a third-party grant and wondering whether or not you can support a position or whether you'll get it in the next year. So that's, I think, what makes that unique. But Cindy, to your point, I think that would be significant for the district, because we would, I mean, the school committee would certainly look at every option. But, I mean, you'd have to look at staff cuts, you'd have to look at program cuts, none of which are ideal, fortunately, so.
Is Tom's
I think
still?
Tom has a,
Is Tom's?
Yep, Tom?
Yeah, just a quick statement. I am extremely proud of how we used our ESSER funds and our ARPA funds. And I can tell you that every one of our schools currently has UV lighting in it to try and mitigate all of the different respiratory diseases. So when we came together as a team, we looked at this money as a one-shot deal, and how could we maximize it, not just for today and tomorrow, but into the future. So I'm really proud of what we've done, and we have safer buildings. And I think we've seen a mitigation of what could have been horrible absences on the part of staff and students had we not had that. And if you take a look at all the research in terms of the learning loss, it's clear that getting students back into school is critical. And I'm just so proud that we have done the things to try and make that happen, especially being a district that never has any money. And it would have been easy for us to rationalize spending foolishly, and we just chose not to.
Thank you, Tom.
okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions on that piece, or? Okay. So looking next at our revolving accounts, this lays out all of our revolving accounts. We have a use of school property, preschool, supplies and materials, student athletics, our out-of-school time program, which still operates out of the old high school, in one of the corridors there. Insurance claims, school choice, scholarship, transportation, and school lunch. Those are our revolving. Melissa, was there anything of note in those that you wanted to point out, or?
You can see, you showed the balances of last year and this year to see the pretty consistent, use of those revolving funds. Yeah.
Okay, moving to our next section here on special education. Apologize, I'm just getting my slide. Okay, so this looks at the claim threshold through every fiscal year, the reimbursement percentage. This is passed by the legislature each fiscal year, and the reimbursement percentage for out-of-district transportation. These are the year-end claims. So if we look at fiscal '24, and since fiscal '20, the reimbursement percentage has been 75%, but as a result of the claim threshold, the actual reimbursement percentage continues to decrease. So, we saw a larger percentage in the last fiscal year. Actually, if you go to the next slide, this lays it out in some more detail for the 2 fiscal years. So the funds received in FY '24 were 47% after you reduce the net claim for the reimbursement. If you compare that to the funds received in FY '25, that was only 43% of those costs. So that's after you hit the foundation limit, and then you...
Correct.
The percentage, the 75% only applies to the amount that's above that. So the district is only reimbursed for those expenses above that claim threshold. So the net is after you factor in the amount that was expended on the claim threshold. So that has
Yeah, I think that's confusing when you hear we reimburse 70 to 75% of the SPED claims. Basically, the first, so if you look at 100,000 or 140,000, the first 52,000 is the cap. So what happens is you get reimbursed above the 52% at 75% of that. So we're not even at the point when, once you exceed the 52, which is the cap, we're not even reimbursed at 100%. are reimbursed at anywhere between 70 to 75%. So the net effect of that is, if you look at the total claims, we really don't. We receive about 40 to about 45% of the cost of that.
Right. Thank you. And that slide also looks at the number of students there, the total eligible claim expenses, and the net reimbursement claim as well are all outlined there.
And just to point out too, it's always the year after, so it's the claims that we receive in this year would be the claims for last year, is what we receive.
So that's why earlier when I was alluding to the age outs, from those were age outs in the last school year that are received. Those savings aren't realized until the next fiscal year. So once those age outs happen, that's not really a savings until
The following
the
year.
following
Following
year.
year.
Yeah. This looks at the process. So every July, the circuit breaker report is filed. September, October is when the first quarter payment is received. And then invoices are processed through the bill warrant and charged to that account. The total tuition costs FY25 were $1.4 million. Estimated circuit breaker reimbursement, $810,000. The entitlement grant for FY25, $340,000. So the total FY25 budget amount was $284,000.
Yeah. So to clarify, if we didn't have these circuit breaker reimbursement at the 800 and sped entitlement, we would be budgeting in our operating budget at 1.4 tuition, but in a sense, we're budgeting the 284. So those funding sources, definitely, you can see how that helps us to fund our budget.
Right. The next slide looks at Chapter 70, which is the funding that we received from the state. And if you look at the FY25 comparison to FY26, it's under $200,000 of an increase. And, you know, I guess the level of increase has not kept up with the needs that we've experienced, and that, again, is not unique to Westport, but that's a problem.
Or inflation, for that matter.
Exactly, right.
And it hasn't, at least in my estimation, and I won't go on a rant, in 2008, if I am correct, was the last time that there was a real dollar-to-dollar match between what the state was reimbursing us for, and then after that, it took a major dip during the financial crisis, and then has never kept up with inflation. So we're in the position that we're in right now, as well as many other cities and towns. This goes back 15 years.
Right.
Or more, but.
And there's also, on that point, there's a statutory cap on the inflation adjustments in Chapter 70 as well. That's included in Mass General Law, so that cap stays short of a change from the legislature. And we know how inflation has been over the last few years. So that's one of the many reasons why this funding has not kept up with.
And we know how the legislature is as well, so we'll leave it at that.
There have been several bills just to adjust the inflation cap alone that haven't been touched in at least 2 sessions. So,
Yes. Is there anything else you wanted to add on Chapter 70, Melissa? All right, well, I think that concludes the presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Can you talk about the $100,000 for transportation? That seems like a big increase. I mean, is that typical or atypical, or?
Melissa, do you want to?
I mean, is that a new contract? Is that?
Yes.
There was a new
yes,
contract, yes.
So that's reflective of their charges to the district, and so that's
Right.
why
It's also
it kind of jumped out at me.
athletics
Yes.
as well.
It's
is a
solely
portion of
athletic.
that.
It's solely the athletic part, right, that went up 100,000?
Yeah.
That's a majority of that portion of it, yes.
So it's not the yellow buses that
Think
drive.
about maybe 30,000 of it is the increase, but the rest of it, yes. And also, there's been more sports and more,
Right.
Right, that also
I will
has
note
driven it.
also that, you know, I've received some questions from members of the community that ask, you know, about bus routes, why can't we consolidate, why can't we take some off the road? There are certain requirements with not only capacity, but also how long those buses can be on the road. So that's a consideration when looking at those. So you can only reduce them to a certain extent, right?
No, I wasn't
And
even
no,
thinking,
no.
I just want to know why it was a big number.
Yeah, there was a new contract as well, so that,
Yes.
and I know Michelle works very hard to, looking at those routes and making sure that we get the most for our.
And I
for our
believe we
dollar.
brought in a consultant to look at that and change some things within the contract to be able to see what we could save on that. Years of the buses, there's a few, quite a few things within the contract that they did change.
Hugh, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't want to forcefully introduce reality into the discussion, an excellent presentation, et cetera. But this is 6% as required, requested. We all know that the levy of the town is restricted at 2.5%, maybe a little bit from excise taxes or this and that, to generously 3%, and there's no way to make a 6% increase go into overall revenue to the town, 3%. I know there are other departments out there that all know about it. Very unfortunate, I have no negative to say about the presentation and the analysis, et cetera. It's an excellent presentation. We just don't know the money. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Just to comment on that, I felt that it was important for the committee to present a budget that reflects the needs of the students in the town. I know that we continue to, I think it would be somewhat different if we were seeing a steady enrollment or no change or a decrease in enrollment, but that's not the case. And we have certain static expenses that are the same whether you're a district of, a larger district or a district like Westport that we have to incur. And on top of that, the additional expenses that come with just an increase in enrollment, right? You have greater use of facilities, so that means you have greater maintenance costs. You have more students, so you have to fund more classrooms.
If you're doing what you need to do, you're paying the universe of the federal, what you need to do and so forth. I'm just saying, it's a very nice presentation. I have no negatives about it, but of course, we don't have the money.
Yeah, I'd like to, I'm sorry, I'm probably the only person sitting here that spends 2 days a week in the school in front of students. And, as a community, we have no greater responsibility than to educate our children. And I get it, Hugh, but the point is, we have a revenue problem in this town. And, we're sitting here nickel and diming the school committee, and we are just absolving ourselves of that responsibility. I mean, at some point, we got to figure out how to increase revenues and put the programs in place that Tom and Evan are advocating. I mean, I'm just tired of this. I mean, you say 30. You shouldn't have, with a brand-new school that's 3 years old, you shouldn't have more than 20 kids in a class, and I'm in classrooms with 25, 26, 27 all the time. And I don't care how good a teacher you are, you can't deliver the goods with that many kids, and most of them that way. So we need more teachers, we need more staff, I mean, we need more of everything. And I realize this is Pollyanna, but at some point, we got to stop this, blocking of Prop 2.5 overrides or whatever it is, and we've got to deal with our children. And I can't emphasize that enough. And I am just sick and tired of this.
It is.
In response to that, and I'm, if you define new revenue, that's great. We're trying to override the Senate.
Yeah, I know, but, okay, so we need to be creative. I mean, I'm sorry, Hugh, we need to be creative. I mean, there's a voting block that will not allow an override, and we need to figure out how to get around that voting block. I mean, Al went to the mat, last time, and, I mean, I raised my kids in the town of Westwood, and, yeah, we invested in our schools, invested in our kids, and, you can look at the difference.
And Duncan, I appreciate your comments, and to that point, I think that the town certainly values our schools. I mean, last year, there was a motion made at town meeting to allocate additional funding to the school department, and, I would characterize it as almost unanimous, judging by the voice vote, that it was a voice vote, but it was significant support. at town meetings. So clearly, our community values the schools and the service that we provide our students, and sees this as an important part of our town.
Unfortunately, it's not enough people. That's the problem. I mean, I think the parents appreciate the support that the school system provides for the community, but when it came to an override vote, I was with Al on those weekly calls. I mean, we met for several weeks trying to come up with, several months, to come up with a way to try to enhance revenues through an override, and it failed miserably.
2 to 1.
We don't get the same support when it comes to the ballot box. We didn't get the same support overall to increase those revenues. The part that everyone has to remember, absent of that revenue increase, it's a pie. It is one pie. And the schools right now take up 54% of that pie. 20% comes from public safety, so you're at 74%. Another 15% comes from, goes to required payments, pension payments, insurance payments for the town, for the buildings, for the employees and whatnot. Those are payments that have to be made. That used to be 7% of the budget. It's now 15% of the budget due to increased costs, just like everything else that you experience. The town side faces those same issues. So if you add those numbers up, that's 90%. We have $52 million roughly that we get from taxes. That leaves 10% that has wiggle room. That's $5 million. If we were to fund the requested amounts, and I'm not saying that they are not justified, I agree, it was an excellent presentation, and we certainly understand the needs and the desires to be able to provide a top-notch level of service for the schools. I came through the public schools here in town. I want to see them continue to excel. But that $5.2 million that I left, given the request here, 20% of that would have, which department should we close? There is no other funding. There is no other funding. Now, there's free cash, but we know that that is living on borrowed time. I defy any one of you here to tell me that every year when you do your allocation of budgeting expenses in your own budget, that you are not taking money out of your savings account every year to make ends meet. And if you do, it's not sustainable. That there's an end run that all of a sudden you go, oh, what happened? I don't have any, that savings account is empty. How am I going to now provide for what I've built up? That is not sustainable. To keep compounding those numbers creates a very dangerous problem in the future. We do have ample free cash this year. That does not mean that we should use that for programs that we can't sustain going forward. I would love to be able to fund all of those things, but you're really looking at $5 million that's left, and that's it. So if you take $1 million of that, an additional $1 million, that's not even counting the free cash allotment, an additional $1 million out of that. I don't know whose budget we're going to cut. We'd have to either cut the library, cut the Council on Aging budget, perhaps cut, even if we cut the landfill, the transfer station, that's pretty much self-sufficient. That only costs the town probably less than $100,000 a year in total. So I don't know what, we'd cut recreation, we'd cut Council on Aging, we'd cut library. We'd have to cut something else, because even those things don't even add up to $1 million. So I don't know where else the money would come from. That's the problem. As Duncan explained, we have a revenue problem, and right now, we can't solve that absent of an override. We tried an override, and it failed miserably.
Well, 17 have failed. 17 have failed. And I guess what I'm saying is, I get it. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah,
math,
I know.
it's a math thing. You
Right.
can do it in a spreadsheet, and it's $5 million.
Right.
I mean, you're right.
Yeah.
But the point is, I think as a finance committee, and I think as a town, we've got to beat the drum. I mean, this has got to stop.
Well, we
And
beat it every year.
But we got to figure out different ways or more. And I just want it on the record that, we want to fund all of those things and more. I mean, it should be, 15%, not 6%. But, I think we all just acquiesce that, we got the highway department down here fixing their own trucks, and that's not good either. So Something's wrong, and I just want it on the record that something is radically wrong.
We held public forums, we held,
I know what you
all
did.
types
I
of-
was
right,
part of
right,
it. I was part of it.
it got whooped 2-1.
Yeah, no, it was 2-1, but, very, very interesting how it's a different group that comes to town meeting, and they all are silent, and then they show up. So
Correct.
somehow we gotta figure out how to win that battle.
Yeah, there's so many fundamental, excuse me, Karen, please.
We have a couple of people that.
Oh,
Melissa?
go first. Yeah.
There's a couple of people remote that have some questions, and then I want to turn it back a little bit to the school budget a little bit. We migrated off, very importantly, to how this fits into the fiscal budget, but we might have a couple more questions on the school budget. I certainly have a couple of questions to ask. So Melissa, you have your hand up, so go ahead, Melissa Pacheco.
Melissa Pacheco, Vice Chair of the School Committee. I just want to say a few comments. This is a systemic problem that has existed for many years. And it starts from way back when I was on the school committee the first time. And I can remember being at a finance committee, and someone who I think is still on here asked us how we could have a mediocre school department. And it started back then with the underfunding of the schools, and just has continued. This whole idea of putting in for an override was, banded against, we included the schools so that in hopes of it would pass. But it didn't work because it didn't. But it's not about, we're in this place because all of a sudden there's not enough funding. No, the town and the finance committee has not funded the schools the way it should have for years. And now we're at a place where we are finally starting to bring up our numbers in our high school, and we're getting more money from the state, which we should get. The schools should get every additional penny that comes from the state for our students. It shouldn't be split up, 50, whatever the amount that it's split up. 100% of what comes from the state, because we have more students in our district, should come to our district, should come to our schools to fund what it needs to fund. And this whole, idea of, and I don't even know why we're talking about this, because we're here to share the budget. These are our needs. When you create a budget at home, you're not going to take out the food. You're going to put exactly what you need, and then do everything to be able to try to fund it. And that's what we need to do. That's what we need to figure out. What is the funding coming from the state specifically because we have students in our school, and what percentage of that is going to our district? Because not 100% is, and I think that needs to be looked at. And I also think what needs to be looked at is the free cash and how much funding. When you talk about taking from the library and the rec, we don't want to do that. That's an important aspect of our town. But what we need to do is look at the funds that are available, again, that come from our school. And I'd like to thank Evan for doing a fantastic job, and for our administration for working on a shoestring budget. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, could I just comment on?
And I'd like to comment too. So we do that every year. So the finance committee, the town administrator, along with the select board, again, there is a pie, and it gets split as it can. So there's been discussion of, certain aspects of revenue maybe should be 100% to the school, but then that would mean that other revenue would be 0% or something. So overall, 54% is kind of the average split that we try to sustain consistently. So again, if more funds go to the school, that means less funds go to a different department. So there's only a certain amount of dollars that the town has. And so we try to consistently apply that percentage to keep both the town and the school above water, or barely above water as best possible. Go ahead, Evan.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to touch briefly on the override. I just wanted to note that I in my opinion, and I supported the override, but I don't think that was a referendum on the school department necessarily. That was a general override that included other line items. I'm not saying that the town made a value judgment about other departments versus the school department. I just don't think that it was a referendum on the school department, especially when you look at the result of town meeting. The other part of that I just wanted to note was, I know we've had there were about $3.5 million in free cash that was certified last year. So, I normally wouldn't be, obviously going into free cash is not ideal, but I think when we've had consistent, relatively consistent amount over a certain dollar figure for a number of years, and I think that that's, you know, been a, I don't think that, I myself at least wouldn't be as comfortable supporting that if that weren't the case. So I think when I look at that and see that there's been a consistent amount in free cash over the last number of fiscal years, that's, you know, where some of that support came from in the town meeting.
Mr. Alburn, you have your hand up.
Thank you,
And Tom, if I could, just before that, I just wanted to note one last thing, sorry. That, you know, there's also like a notion in town, Cindy, I'm not saying that I'm just saying in general, that there's sort of a school versus town department, you know, competition for dollars in the budget. And, you know, that's certainly not the impression that I want to give. I fully support, you know, the great work that our police and fire department do, our highway department, our other town departments. So I certainly wouldn't be advocating for a cut in those because I understand their needs as well, so.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, and I also want to say that sometimes the tone is the finance committee won't support the school, and that's just not accurate. The finance committee is looking at all of the dollars and try to spend it in its best way to be fair and allocable to everybody. So it's not the finance committee doesn't want to support the school. That is not the case. I think there's
And
everybody
that certainly was
here.
not my intent.
Everybody here wants to support this budget
Right.
as best it can. And so there's not a person here that has criticized a single thing that the school has asked to spend the money on. There's nothing critical. It's really the overall fiscal dollars is what we have challenged with. Go ahead, Tom.
No, thank you. I have to say that when I was superintendent at Diamond, I didn't realize how easy I had it in the budget process. Because I basically shot the paperwork in front of everybody and said, this is what you're going to pay because we have no control over it. The inequities between the vocationals and the comprehensives are phenomenally gross, and I won't get into it today because all I can tell you is that I was looking to recruit a teacher from one of the vocationals, and I was only short about $15,000 in salary. Add to that the fact that we have some departments that are working on really subsistent wages, and I will look to the cafeteria workers in particular who I'm almost embarrassed to talk to them because I feel awful that their lives are the way they are. As this is now my last finance meeting, I can tell you that this is one of the most unpleasant experiences I've ever had in my 41 years in education. Most communities find a way to support their schools because they understand that the quality of life in the town definitely correlates with the quality of life in the schools. We are burning people out in a manner that you just can't understand unless you're in that building. 2 years from now, Michelle Raposa is going to be retiring. You're going to need to hire 2 people to do what Michelle does, and she's not the only one. This is happening throughout the buildings, throughout the district. And, you know, it's easy to talk numbers and that, but these are human beings, and watching them kill themselves is brutal. And I'm going to tell you that is one of the things that I am not going to miss at all, in that having to tell people they have to do more and more and more with less and less and less. So whatever you decide is whatever you decide. This school department made a commitment that we will never go one department against another. We are all in this together. But I can assure you that, you know, I think we should be thinking, at least in terms of the free cash, about the fact that there's a good deal of legislation that could directly impact some of these deficits that we're seeing right now. And there's a big push in terms of circuit breaker and funding it at 90%. If we funded circuit breaker at 90%, a lot of our problems would go away. Am I right about that, Melissa?
It definitely would help us, for sure, Tom.
Correct.
But when you are talking to people in schools where we can't even get into the stratosphere, that means our kids are not getting the best and the brightest. And you know, say whatever you want. You've got to pay for quality. And if you don't, you're going to get mediocrity. And you know what? While we're not where we need to be, I'm extremely proud of where we've come, especially in light of the devastation that this country and the world face during the time of COVID. So I thank you for indulging me in my long narrative, and I apologize about being overly passionate about it, but I see these people every day killing themselves, and it hurts my heart that I can't do more for them.
Madam Chair, just a few comments, and thank you, Superintendent Alvin, for your comments. I want to be really clear on a couple of things. It's been said repeatedly here that the town has a revenue problem. That is true, but as Superintendent Alvin mentioned, the unfunded mandates, the reimbursement formulas that come from the state have crippled school systems around the Commonwealth. It's not just a Westport revenue problem. It's a problem with a failure to prioritize what really needs to be prioritized at the state level. And it's not just school funding. I mean, in general, municipal funding coming from the state level is abysmal, and there seems to be no political will to tackle what is a problem that is crippling cities and towns across the state. Now, a couple things I want to note on this budget here. When we talk about priorities, the things that you're seeing as proposed additionals, this isn't a list of wants, right? You know, we're talking, for example, I just want to make a pitch here we talk about the new therapeutic class. Now, what's not in this is the fact that with a new therapeutic class, that could likely keep us from losing children to out-of-district placements. There was a single student that was nearly $800,000 on budget a couple years ago. And that's just, you know, the average is usually around 100,000 or so, but I mean, those outliers are there. So you're talking about a net cost of $111,000 and the possibility of saving hundreds of thousands of dollars over the next few years. There's, you know, things like we're talking about replacing the district-wide laptops and Chromebooks. So the school committee and the school department worked very hard to figure out a way, how can we make this work and pinching pennies as much as possible. So you're talking about equipment that's already 5 years old. We're not even talking about replacing it all in one fell swoop here. We're talking about staggering it out to a point where it won't affect the operating budget any more than it already is for you know, instead of an all-in-one, you're parsing it out over a few years here. So, you know, we're talking about maintenance and custodial supplies. Like these aren't, you know, that's going to go up everywhere. So I understand the idea of a pie that is finite. But I think we really have to look as a town at what our priorities are. And I think that when you're talking about a situation, as Ms. Brown mentioned, you know, the money's got to come from somewhere. We're not talking about taking money away from any other town departments. I mean, I think we really have to fundamentally look at how we end up with the amount of free cash that we're ending up with. I think there's no question that things are tight and that you know, there is certainly a revenue shortfall, shall we call it, and it is systematic. But we also need to look at, are we manufacturing crises by how we calculate these things? So those are just my thoughts on.
I'd like to keep us back on our school budget if we can, and
Jim had a point.
we're kind of going off a little bit to the fiscal budget, but
So I'd just
Go
like to
ahead,
do a couple of
Bill.
comments. One on the school funding, the state aid from that Chapter 70 that comes to the town is about $5.5 million. School budget is up over $20 million. We do this 46% split of new revenue every year. And whether that should be 56 or 60, I mean, that can always be debated, right? But the Chapter 70, the school side has benefited. I shouldn't say benefited because we haven't got a Chapter 70, but based on the formula, for 10 years we were getting $30,000, $40,000 in new revenue with Chapter 70. And the school budgets were increasing substantially more because the 54% split was actually benefiting them. 2 years ago, we got a bump up, which was about $500,000 in Chapter 70. That kind of benefited the town side a little bit, right? Because we split that new revenue. Last year, we dropped down to $250,000, $60,000, so it was probably an even split. This year, the new revenue for Chapter 70 is only $116,000. So the 54-46 split is actually going to benefit the school this year with the new revenue. And the other thing I just want to say on the,
And Jim, and that's a great point, and that's kind of what I was trying to say, keeping the 54% split keeps it an even keel and just keeps a level of consistency. So this way, the school or the town aren't facing, when those highs or lows come, aren't getting any drastic change from it. So there's a level of consistency. So thank you for putting that in
and
those
overall, to
terms.
everybody else's point, I
Yeah.
checked, 70 new revenue each year is minimal compared to most
Yes.
communities. And that is probably the key factor that has hurt Westport over the years. I mean, you're talking millions over like an 8-year, 10-year
Right.
period for Swansea, Seacon. You need like $18, $20 million more in new revenue just on that Chapter 70 formula than Westport has. So that's one of the reasons why we're struggling. The other thing is this free cash, right? We've finally got to a point where the free cash that we got this year, 3.5, is consistent with other communities in our area. We've just become so accustomed to not having free cash, or that it being so low that it's become the norm. Free cash was certified for FY '24. We've already made adjustments to that number in FY '25, which we're doing now. So we've kind of reduced, we increased our revenue projections that should eat into that free cash for FY '25. And again, this year with the budget, we're going to bump that up a little bit more. So, I don't think you're going to see I'd love to see 3.5 in a couple of years, but I don't think you're going to see that again. It's also one-time funding, right? And it's cumulative. If we use free cash at town meeting, or we use free cash to balance the budget, it gets us through for a few months or a year. But it's cumulative, we're going in the wrong direction. We were 400,000, 300,000, we went up 400, 500. Last year, we're 652. It's not sustainable. And it's while it will help the department, the town department, the school department for 1 year, the following year, if we do not have that free cash allocation, it's going to be devastating. You're talking about cuts now to get your budget down a little bit. If you have to cut $500,000, $600,000 from where you were the previous year, it's going to be devastating.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why, that's the main reason why we're cautious about using this free cash. I'm sorry, I got off
That's
the
okay.
budget.
No,
No,
that's
no,
okay. I mean, it all plays in, so this is all an element of it. So I wanted to ask a question, really strategically for the school's point of view. So last year, the town administrator and we all met and had talked about a 5-year plan. And that 5-year plan tried to lay out exactly what were you saying, that the school's budget should be able to sustain an increase of 3 to 3.5% per year, and based on the new revenue and the growth. And clearly, this budget right now is at 6%, so that's outside of the norm, outside of sustainability. My question is, my question for the school, and we didn't really talk about this specifically in the past, but you've continued to talk about your enrollment is increasing, which is a great thing. But at what point do you reach maximum capacity? And at what point does strategically this become a bigger challenge for the town to be able to support increased enrollment levels? Where are you at capacity? And do you have a 5-year plan in terms of where you're anticipating the school needs are? And at what point will the school need more capacity?
Well, sir, I think the near-term concern there is staffing, especially in our younger grades, because that's where, if there's more families living in town, if they're starting a family, they're starting their children in the younger grades, right? So the Macomber and the elementary school are really where a lot of the classes are stretched. I know there are certainly high school and middle school classes that are at that level as well. So I think the near-term issue is a staffing issue. I mean, space is always an issue as well, but I'm certainly not asking for a building. But I think in the near term, especially if you're looking at 5 years, it's really a staffing question. I mean, because we're seeing the return on that larger class size, and that'll reflect in whether it's test scores or whether it's student performance, right? If you have larger classes, you may not be able to personalize as much. I have full confidence in our staff, of course, that they can meet the need, but it just makes it more difficult when you have that. So, it's a problem that compounds, I think, over time. So that's I guess the within 5-year concern is a staff issue, especially if there's more housing being built, if there's, that's certainly something that's on the radar of the administration.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it needs to be asked, what's the alternative?
Mm-hmm.
Because, we're not seeing huge numbers of placements coming in from out of district. I mean, we're talking about growth within the town. So if you start, even if the trajectory is sustained, I mean, if we start losing students to placement, I mean, that's gonna affect the costs and the revenue as well. So,
Right, at that
it's
point, it
kind of
becomes
like,
a revenue problem.
then it becomes a revenue problem
Right.
when you're.
Right. Well, and that's it's the bigger picture here. So, we all do what we can for this year to try to get through the budget, but trying to do that 5-year plan, we know that next year we're going to be faced with that same 3.5% change. And if the school right now has a 6% change and already cutting out so many things from that 6% next year is going to be, what, 6-7%? And the town can still manage the 3%. So the problem just continues to escalate. And we need to understand that. I don't have an answer, right? We've been through this. We've had all these conversations.
Year after year.
Year after year, so
Right.
this is nothing new, but.
Just to add to that, I think, an important consideration there is, as Melissa mentioned, 4% of that alone are contractual. So the bulk of this, are not items that, and even the largest cost items on top of the contractual are ones that, in my opinion, opinion of the committee, are responsible to include in an operating budget, because these are, you look at the therapeutic class, for example, that could be potentially saving the district money in placements. Something like the devices that we know we'll need, that's not something that we wouldn't just in one fiscal year say, well, the devices don't work anymore, so we have to cease, our technology use in classrooms, because that's just the way learning has gone. So I think that would put our district behind. So I think on top of the 4%, the items that are included there, or at least the bulk of them, are ones that, I feel are responsible to, these aren't just things that we're adding in. I think these are needs that, are conscious of our fiscal position, looking at that 5-year period. And that's why, I thought it was a priority for us to include items like the device replacement, and looking at our special education costs and what that age out would look like in the next few years, and what the needs are, so we can say, in this fiscal year, if we implement a therapeutic class, that means we could potentially not only retain students, but bring a couple back into the district, and looking at our 4-year device plan. So in 5 years, we're not faced with we're not asking, CIPC, or trying to put it in the budget, $500,000 and $600,000 for devices. So I think we were trying to, in this budget,
Smooth it out,
reflect
right.
be conscious of that in this.
Excuse me.
Sure thing.
I sympathize with everything you've said, and I think we've said it around this table many times. There are many, many needs, and there is sympathy for everybody at every level of town government. So, I don't need to belabor that point. And I'm the oldest one in the room, I think, and I went through the school system, and I got a damn good education, and I love the education. But having said that, I'll give you a 2-second story. I was having lunch today with Russ Hart, former highway surveyor. When he was highway surveyor, we had 12 people working for the highway department. We now have, what, 3 or 4?
5 with the clerk.
5, okay, so we,
I'm with the clerk, right.
5 with the clerk. We probably have twice as many miles of roads, or at least 40%, whatever the number is, as it was when he was. We go down the list of every department and the schools, and to Karen's point, to Cindy's point, we're not negative as a finance committee, but the pie is only so damned big. We couldn't get an override. We can't get our state legislation to advocate for a realistic income stream, redoing the formulas, whatever it might be, so that we bring ourselves up into the thing. So, as my father would say, you have to play the cards you're dealt. Not you, one has to, I should say. And it's sad. And I don't know how to reconcile it. but everybody's taking 2.5% increases in pay, which is not a sustainable wage increase. Everybody is in this town is working their tails off, working with old equipment. My God, we've got a fire truck that is 31 years old and is a hand-me-down. And we're putting bubble gum and rubber bands on problems at every single level. And I am not upset with you. You guys need to advocate for your department. All right, I mean, that's the way it goes. And I think you did an excellent presentation. But at some point, we got to figure out what gives, or the people in the town have got to say, we've got to step up to the plate. And I'm not getting on a soapbox. I'm simply saying that we've got revenue, we've got expenses, and they've got to match. And it's just really sad. It's really sad. I mean, I feel for this. I'll say it, and then I'm going to get off my soapbox. I feel for this town. I have been here for almost 71 years now, and I've never seen it as divisive and as not as community-oriented. When things need to be funded, people used to fund it. So I'll leave it at that. But I don't have any answers, Evan, or Christopher. I don't. I just don't know what to tell you. But that circle is only so big.
Go ahead.
Here, if I may. Mr. Lisa, appreciate your comments, and your points are well taken. I would note both to your points and Mr. Rouse, to yours, that, you know, looking at our budget, the largest portion is certainly salaries. So the cuts, unfortunately, are either salary related or they're program related, and program related may have a negative return in terms of not retaining students, which results in less Chapter 70 funding, whatever it may be. So there's as we've said in the past, there's not a great answer, right? If you cut staff, you have larger class sizes and you deal with that. If you cut programming, you risk losing students. I know there are some students who go to other districts simply because they offer broader sports options, broader athletic opportunities for them. So we simply don't offer it because of the cost. So so that's a consideration. But thank you, Mr. Lees.
Mr. Alvin has his hand raised.
Mr. Alvin?
Thank you. I apologize for exiting the meeting before we were done, and it was a trick of the hand. I apologize. Anyway, what role does increased school the increase in the amount of money we've got as a result of increased enrollment, what role does that play in free cash? And the reason I ask that is I understand being conservative. I absolutely get it completely. But I also know that it's not really sustainable to suggest that if you're starving, that that's just the way it goes, and hopefully next year will be better. It's kind of empty, to be honest with you. Especially when the free cash is sitting there, that could offset some of this.
Want Jim to address that?
Yes, so just.
Could you clarify what your question is?
Yes, I did, but I'll say it again, though. No
Please
problem.
do.
What role does free cash, what role did the school increase in enrollment play in the increase in free cash? Because on a very cursory level, it seems to me that there seems to be a correlation between the increase in the town's free cash and the increase in our enrollment. Now, if they have nothing to do with each other, fair enough. I'm just asking an interrogatory.
So there is some benefits, but the Chapter 70, like I said, on new revenue went down this year. We're back to 116,000. We did.
Increased for the past 4 years, and one of those increases was the result of that resulted in $550-something thousand more into the town coffers. I'm not looking at having fights with anybody. You know, what bothers me more than anything is I've worked assiduously to bring the town together to a point where today I spoke with Chris Gonzalez from the Highway Department, and we both are desperately trying to get a heavy equipment simulator that wouldn't just benefit the students at Westport, but the cemetery department and the highway department in terms of training. So we have a symbiotic relationship, understanding that we're all in this together. But it was just a simple question that there seems to be a correlation in the free cash growth and the increase in enrollment. Now, if it doesn't exist, then that's fine.
That doesn't exist. The correlation with Chapter 70 and increase in students, it's not there, right? We've gone up in students, but our increase in new revenue is going down. We went up 2 years ago in Chapter 70 significantly because we were considered a minimum aid community prior to that, so we were getting $30 per student or $60 per student, depending on the year. Once we got out of that, or we were no longer classified as minimum aid, we actually got bumped up quite a bit. The number of students plays in the formula, but it's only a small variable in the Chapter 70 formula. But what does help with the students is that on the other side, the assessments, and I think this is to your point as well, Tom, that the charter school, the number of students going to charter schools and the number of students going, taking school choice has decreased. So our assessments on the state side have decreased. They were going up $100,000, $200,000 a year 5-6 years ago. Those have leveled off and actually gone down a bit. So that's been a significant bonus. And I think that's where you see the increase in students in Westport really showing up in our state aid.
But it doesn't, I think his question was, does it show up in free cash?
It does.
It does not trickle down to free cash.
Only if the estimates come in higher than what we're budgeting.
Right.
And, you know, what we found out over the years is a slight variation in the final budget that comes out in July, maybe $20,000, $30,000 overall in state assessments, but there's really nothing. What we get now, what they've been showing in the governor's budget for Chapter 70 is pretty much what we get at the end.
I think Jim's point is well taken, that when we had our group together and we were doing all this stuff, it isn't just about the revenue. It isn't just about the formula on the revenue side. It's also about the assessments. And it doesn't matter exactly, but 2015 to 2020, 2021, the assessments for charter schools and for out-of-districts students,
right.
they were off the chart. I mean, we went from zero maybe 10 or 12 years ago to, it was over $1 million. So, yeah, you know, we can talk about revenue for the schools, but we have to balance that at the same time. Now, things have gone down, which means that the net effect, even if the revenue assessment never changed, not assessment, but the revenue in-stream,
right.
Deliverable from the state never changed. The assessment going down increases, you know, what's left in the pot.
But to Karen's point, even those years where the assessments were very high compared to what we were receiving in Chapter 70 money, and the enrollment in schools had dropped significantly. At one point, it was down 25% below what it is today. The percentage allocation, 54-46, never changed. So the schools never, in the allocation, in the pie allocation, even though the impact was significant because enrollment was down, assessments were up, that allocation always remained the same. So the school budget was never penalized because enrollment was down. During those years. Yeah. So that's why, you know, as she addressed, it has, you know, it has a factor of equalizing itself over a period of time, because we never look at, well, it went up, it went down, it went this, it went that. It's a good split. It's a split that has pretty much survived the test of time overall, in good times and in bad times. And, you know, no one wants to go back to that type of level of enrollment, but, and I know it doesn't matter, you need a teacher whether there are 3 kids in the class or 30. I understand that, but from a funding standpoint from the state regarding Chapter 70, the town supported the schools no matter what, and we continue to do so, but our capacity is limited.
See if anybody has anything else. So, you know, I want to thank everybody in the school. I think this presentation was terrific.
It was excellent.
Excellent. You did a terrific job. It's really nice to see not so much the numbers, but really more of the operations of what's doing, and so I think this presentation is terrific. So I thank you again for doing this the second year in a row, and I know it's a lot of work, and it's greatly appreciated. I don't have any other specific questions on the budget. Again, I think you did a terrific job. You laid out where last year's numbers were, and then you itemized in very nice detail all of the increases to get to where you are. So it's very transparent. I think it's very obvious. So I think you did a terrific job. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair, and I'm always available for further questions should any committee members have them. Happy to discuss and answer them, and if I don't have the answer, I can certainly direct it to the right person. No. Yeah.
So
and I want to thank you as well.
And I do have, so on the conversation that we have been having on the fiscal nature, right? So I know numbers are still in the works with the town administrator, and the select board has not, is scheduled at the next meeting to approve the budget. So just to kind of give a little framework for where we currently are right now, and I stole these numbers, Jim, from your meeting last night. I took some detailed notes. So that, again, this is a draft budget. It's not approved by the select board. The finance committee hasn't even seen any of it yet. We haven't seen free cash needs for other articles yet, so we haven't seen anything yet. So there's no, we have no basis for anything at this point. But looking at the fiscal 25 budget was $21,999,082. If you factor in the traditional 54% split of the net revenue that is to be estimated to be generated, that comes to $927,001, which would make the school number on the town budget $22,926,083. The current school budget is $24,040,788. That means there's a current gap of $1,115,000. So that's where putting all of that discussion into what we're talking about now is a pretty significant.
And that's removing free
I was
cash
just gonna
from
ask.
both.
That's without
for
free
both
cash,
sides,
right, so there's-
Even from the current year.
Right, so there's,
Correct.
without any level of free cash in there, so. So of course, there's the narrowing of the gap in some capacity, right? So for some amount of free cash, I don't think anybody here would disagree that there needs to be some amount. How much that would be, those are discussions we need to have, but, Jim, I don't want to present your numbers, but you did present them last night, so you're trying to narrow the gap
Yeah,
a bit.
almost to split it, I'm trying to get up to $23,550,000. And to do that, that would still be $400,000 plus in free cash, and then we would have to pay off the campground and use some OPEB money to get to that number. It's either that or it's cuts on the other side, which
That's an addition of 400 plus how much? Another 250?
400 plus, yeah, about 140, 175, so what,
Okay.
215.
Which is effectively changing the split from 54% to 59% is what that does.
Yeah, I don't have that number.
Yeah, I
It
do.
sounds about,
You know I do. Yeah, so and I'm not disagreeing in concept of the number, but what you're proposing really changes the split from 54% to 59%, and then giving $400,000 in free cash. So a total of $617,000 essentially to the school.
So Karen, if I can just interrupt for a second so I can understand, you're talking about the increase in the split from 54 to 59 includes the pay down of the
That would be
campground?
part of it, right, so what Jim's proposal is to pay down, the savings from the pay down of the campground would go 100% to the school and 0% to the town, so that effectively adds to the split.
But yet, pardon me, but yet the town paid for the campground.
I'm not disputing.
No, I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm just, again, trying to
Yeah.
understand.
In either way, right, so what Jim's trying to do is give as much Jim's coming up with a way to try to come up with a way to bring as much closer to the school number to narrow that
But
gap.
should that even be part of the operating budget? The pay down for the campground? I mean, that's a
Well,
capital,
that's
that's a
something that
capital
we'll discuss
expenditure.
when we get to that.
Yeah, without getting into the nuance
Okay,
of
all right.
some of that,
I'll bet,
really,
yeah.
the goal of what I'm trying to do is to try to stay a little bit at a high level. We'll have those conversations once Jim presents the budget, then we can
Right.
kind of look through, but just on the surface, so Jim's coming up with ways to bring another 616,000 to the school to narrow that $1.1 million gap, is where currently what was discussed at the select board meeting last night. So that still leaves, even with that, which is significant, so that's $600,000, so that still leaves $500,000 where we're off. So as a school committee, have you come up with an alternative budget that if the budget is this, do you have a secondary budget that you've been going through and what you would do for cuts?
If you're asking if we will make it work, I mean, the answer, of course, is we have to.
Yeah.
We had to do it last year. We had to meet and decide what we were going to do to meet that number. So the answer is, we'll do what we have to given the resources we have, yes. The other thing I wanted to note on that, and Mr. Lees, to your point on the campground pay down, and I appreciate Jim's efforts on getting the number, trying to get closer on that. I know last year that was included as a proposal in free cash, I believe, if I remember correctly. So I'm not sure, to your point, if it was an operating budget. I know last year that it was proposed to come out of free cash, so I don't know how that was accounted for. I just wanted to
Yeah, I
know for
think last
context.
year it was proposed to pay off the debt, but when the town floor increased the
Right.
free cash to go to the school, we didn't
We
have
had
the
to
free
pull it
cash,
back, right.
so it had to get pulled
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. I was just pointing it out, so it
Yeah.
was, yeah.
And again, our committee hasn't seen the budget, so there's no decisions,
Right.
we're not, there's no judgment here, it's just, I'm just trying to lay out where the numbers are today and what the challenges are with the numbers as presented. Give a little framework for some of the discussion that we're having.
But the short answer is yes, we'll make it work because we have to, yes.
And I think, Jim, the numbers for the overall fiscal budget, you've pretty much got a lot of the numbers.
Yeah, we're pretty close, which is good and bad, right?
Right,
So,
right.
we're not going to get any good
We're not
surprises.
going to see
I don't think
something
we're gonna
falling
see
from the
any
sky, probably.
Real bad surprise. I think I had a recent discussion with the Diamond Business Manager, and it looks like that may come a little bit under what I had in the preliminary budget, so it could be, 20, 30,000, maybe a little bit more in there, but the one number that there's two numbers, the property insurance and the health insurance. Health insurance we should have this week or next week. Property insurance is always tough
Yep.
to get that early.
Well, that's all the news I wanted to share, just, a couple of numbers. That's where we're at. So that's the, this is the difficult part, where does this come from? Okay, is there anybody? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate it very much.
Again, I'm always available for additional questions. I hope we were able to put together a presentation that lays out the proposal that we have and the reasons that the committee is supporting it. We went through a pretty robust process, I think, in this, and unfortunately left out a lot of the needs, but we felt that these reflected the highest priority. So we wanted to make sure that these were presented to the Finance Committee, and thank you again, and thank you, Jim, for
Thank you.
your work on the budget.
Thank you, it was terrific.
Thank you. If you have any questions, too, you can through Mrs.
Right,
Reposa,
Sure
too.
will. All right, thank you so much.
Do we have any other items on our agenda?
I think let me look. I think I just kept our discussion of the budget 26, but I think we've discussed
I
that.
think we have.
I have been reluctant, or not, I shouldn't use the word reluctant. I have not scheduled the joint meeting that I was intending to try to to do with the finance committee, the school committee, and the select board, which in part was to discuss some of these things, but with the select board and the full school. I can try to send out an email to everyone. Maybe we can find a date, and maybe we can do it in the next week as a hybrid to just have some discussion, but I'm not sure if that works for everybody.
I would be open to that. I know timeline-wise, it's difficult with where we're at in the budget process. I know the select board will be voting on their recommended
Right.
budget.
I
but
wanted to
certainly-
wait
I'm certainly
till you
open to it.
presented this
Yeah.
budget before we had the meeting for the select board to present, because we really should see your numbers, but
Sure.
now I should have just scheduled it in advance, but,
I would say I'm not sure if there would be a great benefit to a joint meeting at this point in the process. I think the last time that joint meetings were happening last budget, it was a little earlier, and I know we had one even in the previous year too. So I'm not, certainly if it's scheduled, I'll be there, but I'm just not sure if it would have the same value as it did last year, this late in the process, but that's just my thoughts there.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for coming.
All right, well, Any
Motion to,
thoughts?
are you ready to adjourn? or-
Yeah, we can, yeah, we can certainly, we can approve the minutes, and at the next meeting, I have no correspondence. We'll talk, I'll send an email talking about our next meeting date in the
Okay.
agenda, so,
Want a
do
motion?
you want to, I'll let the school committee adjourn their meeting first?
Motion to adjourn, although we lost a quorum about that.
Oh, did you already do
So-
that?
But
You made no decision.
Adjourn by
so that's-
we adjourned by default, indeed.
Yes,
All right, you are
meeting's
adjourned.
adjourned.
All right, then I will take a motion to adjourn the finance.
So moved.
Yep, second.
All right, we can do roll call here.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, and Hugh, are you up for adjourning?
I'm still here. That's fine.
All right. Can you vote yes to adjourn?
Are you approving the adjournment of the meeting, you?
Yeah, I didn't know any motion, but yes.
Okay.
Vote yes.
Terrific. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
No opposed. Thank you very much.